Post Office receiving a 2.4 billion rand lifeline from Treasury. Amid reports, though, it could very well be liquidated. The SOE says it's going through a slew of financial challenges and a business turnaround strategy. Well, we'll talk about that strategy in just a second. Well, to talk about their strategy, their money they have, the money they don't have, of course, is more important. Mark Barnes, former SA Post Office CEO, coming in this morning. Mark, good morning to you. Appreciate your time. And when we start talking liquidation with the Post Office, many people are going to start getting a bit of a fright, because I imagine you can't not have a post office, but some would suggest it's barely functioning now. So what is it actually doing?
Yeah, so first of all, I see they settled the one creditor that put them into liquidation, which is sort of a stay of execution. But it's, I'm not an insolvency expert, but you can't willy-nilly go and settle one creditor, because the next guy will pitch up and put them into liquidation. So the truth of the matter is that the organization is insolvent. Its assets, its liabilities exceed its assets by 4.1 billion. And 3 years ago, that was a year ago, so it's probably worse now. And 3 years ago, the assets exceeded the liabilities by 5.2 billion. So there's a 9.3 billion value diminution there. Okay. So what could happen? You can't let the post office go. There's only one other tiny little country in the world that hasn't got a functional post office. We would be the only significant economy in the world without a post office. But we have to reframe our thoughts about what a post office is. A post office is not a place where you go for post. A post office is an irreplaceable government infrastructure that is pervasive in South Africa more than any other bank branch network or any other functional network. It's a place where we should invite our citizens for services, including the payment of social grants. The reason why we fought and won to pay social grants is because it's a service, not a profit center that the private sector was doing, which I'll get onto in a minute. You could do everything at a post office. It should be a place. It is a place in most countries in the world where citizens of the country go into a trusted environment where you don't have to be a technical genius, where you know your data isn't at risk, and you can do anything there. Go and get your COVID vaccine, go and download education, go and use Wi-Fi, go and do whatever you like.
It was like a one-stop shop almost.
One-stop shop with access to the national payment system, which is why you need the bank inside the post office. Okay. Now, all of that stuff starts coming together when you're marrying a commercial and developmental mandate, which can only take place in an organ of state. If you let it go, so to speak, and if you let private sector take over all of those functions, the only people who will be able to afford to pay for them are about 3 to 5% of the population. What do we do with everybody else? Okay? And so it's not a possibility. And not only that, but it would impact significantly on the sovereign rating if the state allowed one of its state-owned entities to go bust. So I don't think that's on the cards. So what do we do? Okay? First of all, get the capital construct right. Understand the difference between developmental funding and commercial sustainability, and let those two become partners. Secondly, get the strategy agreed and then get out of the room, okay? And let the people who grow businesses within boundaries go ahead and grow the business, and make space for things like, can we distribute antiretrovirals, or what else can we do in the post office under license?
When you say get out the room, was there interference? Do you think there still could be now too many cooks in the kitchen?
Well, there's only one shareholder, so you don't have choice. You can't like sell your shares and buy someone else, okay? But the state, for example, I mean, the ultimate interference when I was there was when they walked in one day and say, "Hi, Mark, we're going to take the bank out." What? No. I mean, the bank is an integral part throughout the world. All post offices that are functioning sustainably have financial services as a core part of their offering in China, in Europe, and everywhere you like. Okay, so the state ultimately prevails over the strategy and over what you do. And what we should do, and it goes to cities, it goes to everywhere, appoint a professional team and then play the role of the state, which is vital. I'm not saying they don't belong there. They belong there as an enabler, as a policy formulator, as a guide, but not as an operator, because this is a business, and it's an ecosystem, a big systems ecosystem, okay? And so you need people who do that for a living. Now, we all understand that there's a transformation mandate in this country, and it's imperative, it's not up for discussion. Okay? So what you need now is to get an appropriate partnership between skills and political influence, and let that strategy evolve so that in 3 years' time you have a fully competent, trained up passing of skills, not just passing of capital, and you have a functional operating SOE or a functional operating Johannesburg or whatever you wish.
What does a professional team look like? Who would that be? I mean, don't you give names if you don't have off the top of your head, but where do you get a professional team from? What are their skill sets? How big is that team?
Well, that team is probably core team, less than 10 people. Mm-hmm. You need someone who understands finance deeply. There's evidence to suggest that not only does the post office not manage its finances appropriately, but when they go to the portfolio committee or when they go to the press for that matter, very few people will have a deep understanding of finance. And it's not their job to, but there must be someone who does, okay, so that you know the cost of capital and so on. You need someone who understands operations, big systems operations. How do you move a bit of this to a bit of that most efficiently and so on? Then you need someone who understands client needs and you understand client engagement. How do we engage with the social grant participants? How do we market? How do we infuse? How do we get customer relationships going? Instead of being the state which doesn't listen, let's be the state which does. Okay.
Was that the problem? The state. So all this that you're telling me and telling us, you probably would have told government and state back in the day.
Absolutely.
It was just never done. Why do you think that was, though? It doesn't sound, from what you're explaining, all that complicated.
No,
it's a systems and a strategy, but it was never listened to.
Well, it's a South African issue. We've got people with business acumen sitting on one side of the table, and they've got a superiority complex. Okay? And then we've got government who hasn't had the business experience sitting on the other side of the table, and they've got a bit of an inferiority complex. And so these two people argue with each other, and force prevails over logic. We've got to move on from that, man. We haven't got time, okay? This disintegration of the entire South African ecosystem is borderline upon us, okay? You can tell it by what's happening in the streets. So we have to get over our stuff, leave our baggage at the door. Doesn't matter where you come from. What is the skill set, mindset, power base that needs to be added together to think about a future that's more interesting than our past, okay? And we aren't over it yet. Yeah, we've created a sort of elite middle. It's no bigger than it was. It's just slightly different composition. But the vast majority of our population is much worse off.
I want to talk about jobs for a moment as well, because we're talking high-level strategy here. Well, not talking high level, but we're talking strategy here.
Yeah.
There's also jobs at risk here as well. There's thousands and thousands of jobs. Does there need to be a liquidation and a cutting of costs to get the post office to where you say it should be? Is this just a necessary means to an end?
Well, it's a checkpoint, if nothing else, okay? People listen to the word liquidation, it gets front page cover, okay? And so it is a control alternate delete position. You say, what now? Now, do you actually have to go through the experience of liquidation in order to learn the lesson, or can you sit back and intellectually understand the consequence and prevent it? I think the latter, okay? I think, though, that we do need to gather and listen to each other. And you know, I'm looking at that beautiful picture that you've got of Johannesburg in the back. I mean, the entire efforts in the Joburg Council are spent fighting with each other, not looking at the city. Same in all the SOEs. We're fighting about power. We're fighting about the distance between political power and economic essence. Okay, those two need to come together and become friends.
Mark, I'm going to say thank you very much. I think, especially in the start of our conversation, you painted a very, very bleak but good picture of what is the problem now and how we need to fix it. And I need to say thank you to you for coming in to speak to us this morning. Mark Barnes, former SA Post Office CEO. Dire, but it does sound like if the right strategies are in place, it could very, very well be quite easily sorted out. My thanks.